Art, now that you've got the enclosure and the single bald eagle, it seems that...
At the world-renowned San Diego Zoo, Dr. Billy Lee Lasley conducts research on the determination of sex in monomorphic birds, often rare and endangered avian species that give no visible clues to their being either male or female. Like this bald eagle, for example. Lasley's approach is a new controlled method called fecal steroid analysis, which avoids standard frequently traumatic handling and dangerous blood testing by a harmless laboratory examination of a given individual's collected sample, without need ever to lay a hand on these delicate, often critically excitable creatures. As a reproductive endocrinologist, Dr. Lasley's scope of research extends beyond birds to include virtually every species at the zoo in his overall efforts to optimize captive breeding propagation. However, it is their revolutionary work with birds that has brought the attention of zoo people around the world to Bill Lasley and his staff in Southern California. Fecal steroid analysis, begun here only 2 years ago, is a relatively inexpensive procedure, a good method, indeed probably the best and most practical method devised so far in determining sex among these monomorphic species. Says Dr. Lasley, to imagine the simplest method for sexing these exotic birds, and then to make it work. That was our goal. And we did just that. The really amazing thing, he says, is that nobody else came up with it. To enter the research lab at the San Diego Zoo is to discover a facility that is one of the best of its kind in the world. For Bill Lasley's select technicians, this is a place of constant discovery. The zoo, for Lasley himself, is what he always dreamed of, to work with animals like this armadillo, subject of just one of his ongoing studies. In fact, it is rather common for Lasley to have at least several projects in hand at once. For Bill Lasley lives in a 3-room apartment directly beyond the wall of his laboratory. When asked, "When do you ever go home?" he answers, "I don't go home. This is my home." The recent investigation of Dr. Lasley's deals with the serious problem of captive sterility, a stigma that mysteriously affects the normally fertile armadillo by not allowing reproduction outside the natural habitat for this species, a phenomenon also affecting certain other animals. In the lab, preparations are made for a harmless, benign procedure called a laparoscopy, enabling Bill to look directly into this pregnant wild armadillo in order to help further the investigation of its reproductive physiology, leading perhaps to solving the riddle of captive sterility in more exotic and rare zoo animals.
You're now looking at the top of the uterus?
Can you apply suction with a syringe to the berries?
Dr. Kurt Benushka, Director of Research at the San Diego Zoo, aids Bill with a laparoscopy. Benushka's long-time interest in the armadillo as a victim of captive sterility and as the only animal besides man that can harbor leprosy bacteria brought Bill Lasley to his current study of this animal. So much to be learned here from such a strange armor-plated creature, for the benefit of other animals as well as man.
See the bladder?
In an atmosphere of scintillation counters, test tubes, and laparoscopes, research scientists frequently tend to minimize their accomplishments, and so professional modesty is a fair description of the tone here. But the achievements, and quite possibly even more important, the promise of Bill Lasley's group, carries an immense value for us all. The Duke Langer monkey, likely the most beautiful and one of the rarest of all subhuman primates, presents still another challenge for these people. Today, there are only 50 Duke Langers in captivity in the world. With Dr. Benushka, reproductionist Bill Lasley strives for an optimal breeding program for this very endangered victim of habitat destruction in its native Vietnam.
I don't think that you can really practically approach the problem by going
In San Diego's Duke Langer Conservation Program, captive breeding of zoo-born specimens is one vital goal of the propagation of the endangered and the threatened. Under our very eyes, a realm of wildlife tragically diminishes. And so captive breeding is perhaps our best hope in saving many of the world's existing species. Through special expanded projects, such as an international service for fecal steroid analysis and persistent exploration into the vagaries of captive breeding, Dr. Lee Lasley, a Rolex Laureate of uncommon personal concern, continues his determined efforts to do something about the ultimate survival of our world's animal population.